Hi everyone, I'm Stuart from Linchpin Media.
I'm Dan.
For those who don't know Linchpin Media, we're a digital consultancy business based here in Canada that specialises in helping businesses launch their products and services in Canada, or help Canadian businesses with consultancy or with our consultancy services and things like commercial strategy, research, and analytics. Welcome to our expert series, where we're going to be chatting to professionals about upcoming trends and learnings from their own career and maybe even their own mistakes.
So next up, we have Scott Smith, who is a brand marketing expert. Where's Scott? He's the director of brand partnerships at CBC. Previously, he worked in brand marketing roles for McDonald's, Infinity, and Ford. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. Great to see you, and excited to talk about brand.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So we've got a few questions to kind of run through, but just have a good discussion. We're really interested to hear what you have to say. So I'll start it off. I mean, first question for me is, can you talk to us around what is brand marketing?
Sure. Yeah.
Non-marketing type.
what a loaded question, but I think I can give you hopefully a fairly distilled answer on what brand marketing is to me. It's the discipline of being a champion and a steward of a brand. And something that I heard recently at a conference that really resonated with me, it was a professor from Queen's University, marketing professor, who said that the most undervalued and maybe misunderstood or overlooked asset on a company's balance sheet is their brand. So really the art and the science of brand marketing is everyone's job. It's not just the brand marketing managers, but the brand marketing manager is the person closest to that discipline, in the sense that it's their job to elevate the brand, to extract and unlock as much value as there is in that brand as possible. And that manifests in many ways. That's everything from brand opinion to sales. So often we tend to think of brand marketing as just creating sexy ads, but it's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cross-functional, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have good customer service and your whole sales process and just structures, systems. Like there's a host of things, and I mean there's an annual ranking, I think, too, right? So right. Coca-Cola, Starbucks. I mean, it's so important, especially nowadays when consumers can easily switch and find alternatives.
Couldn't agree more. And I do love reading the Interbrand rankings every year. I always felt very lucky to have worked for many brands that appear on those lists. I mean, you always see McDonald's is perennially at the top, Ford as well, and Nissan is generally in the top 100 as well. And even as an intern, I got to work for American Express, which tends to show up highly on those rankings too. So I've worked with some big ones, and I've learned a lot, which I'm able to apply now in my role in media.
You mentioned there around the balance sheet, the line on the balance sheet or on the budget. Did you find it was one of the first areas when things were tight? So maybe if you're looking into Q4 back end of the year, that would be heavily scrutinized for maybe savings. Was it the first area that would kind of be looked at in that budget? One, and then two, was there a reason why you think that was?
That's a great question, Stu. And you'll notice that when I talk, and this is true of my day-to-day work, as well as in conversations like this one, I very rarely use the term spending when it comes to marketing and advertising. And I do that deliberately because I believe that it's an investment. And I think typically there's a tendency in marketing and sales organizations to think of advertising as simply an expense rather than an investment. The difference, of course, being when you spend on something, you're consuming it. It's disposable, it's transient, it's short-lived. But when you invest in something, and think of your stock portfolio or your home, if you own if you're a homeowner, you're expecting a return on that investment. And that's the key difference. So yes, to answer your question, Stu, I have seen that throughout my career that marketing and advertising is often seen as, especially brand advertising, is seen as discretionary at times, that it is perhaps one of the first line items in the marketing budget to be reduced. But that same Queen's University professor, and I feel like I'm going to pass off a lot of his knowledge as my own here, talked about, as we enter a recession, previous recessions have shown that brands who continue to invest in brand advertising, brand marketing through a recession tend to not only rebound, but continue growing through a recession, where brands who see it as discretionary, as an expense, and cut back on their budget tend to have a harder time recovering. So yes, it's very common, but I think it's really, the key is looking at it as an investment rather than spending.
Absolutely. So it's interesting the way you're talking around brand marketing and with your experience, because we've already spoken around the challenge of let's say the budget, the ROI. But would you be able to explain kind of challenges that you faced as a brand marketing manager? So this could be anything from just day-to-day challenges or just bigger challenges just in the role that you encountered through your different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly one of them, is needing to be persuasive about what brand marketing is to those in other functions and other disciplines, especially when you're in a sales organization. When a brand is primarily concerned with driving bottom line sales, revenue, and profit, it can be challenging for a brand marketing manager to overcome those perceptions that marketing is not revenue generating, and that it's strictly on the expense side of the ledger, right? So that can take some real convincing for some people. So that certainly is a challenge. And I found that, especially in automotive, where that month's sales are closely scrutinized, that quarter's sales, market share, that there's also a short-term orientation that you've got to counteract. You've got to work against that desire of the sales function to see sales materialize right now in the same period in which we're investing in advertising, when marketers know that that's very hard to do, and typically you have to invest and see the returns on more of a long-term horizon rather than immediately. So a couple things: you've got the short-term orientation you've got to work against, as well as the idea that it's strictly an expense and not an investment you would earn a return on.
So Scott, so it sounds like and you hear it all the time, and a bit of a misconception in terms of measuring brand marketing. So ROI, however you want to measure it. Is it would you say that's true? It's a misconception, I guess. And then is it because timeframes? I mean, we all live in a very short term, and you mentioned stock portfolios, everything. Everyone wants the return, next six to 12 months, especially
hours,
or finance, whatever it is, or yes, depending on what you look at. But yeah, so it sounds like, is it maybe just like timeframes are just not aligned? Just people are a bit, out of whack with what they should be measuring in terms of, attributing that investment that they did, they 2-3 years ago, that is now at least supporting, the sales that are coming in. Just that linear kind of connection probably doesn't exist, but good to get your thoughts in terms of how, maybe how you should be attributing brand investment.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to how you measure, Dan. I think you nailed it there, that you have to have the right measurement apparatus. You have to have the right goals, right? That if you're investing in advertising or branded content or integrations, or even more conventional spots and dots in a given period, you have to have your goals aligned with what you're investing in. If you're investing in a brand sell campaign, let's say, on television and online video, expecting for it to produce significant lift in retail sales in that same month that you're in market, you've set yourself up for disappointment, right? Your chances are you're not going to see that pay off in the same period. So I think it's really that eternal struggle between sales and marketing, that sales sees marketing's function as a supporting role, which it is. I mean, marketing does support sales, but the time horizon is different. Where a sale is observable, it's immediate, it's binary. You either sell a product in a given period or you don't.
Mhm.
Where marketing is the build up to that sale.
It's all like cumulative, right? And then
Exactly.
you start to, yeah, and it can change, I guess, overnight in a sense, depending on reputational and stuff like that. But it really is this long-term kind of runway of continually investing in different ways. Like Stu and I actually had an interesting conversation, I think yesterday. And it was all around, it was a brand marketer, and they had a huge rollout, huge plan. And they were running along, I think they were on like month 12, let's say. And then the board started to get a little bit, hey, we're not seeing exactly what we thought we'd see. So they're like, this has to run for 18 months, 20 months before you can really start to measure and see the impact. And I think it was just that, like you said, just setting it up and setting expectations up front for this is how it kind of pays off, eventually and in the end. And this is how you measure, this is what you would look for. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Just depending on the person that's maybe looking at the line item right at the time, like you said, on the balance sheet, but
right. And it's intuitive, right? Like, I mean, what's funny about organizational behavior is that we tend to have sort of a functional tunnel vision. If you're in sales, you're primarily concerned with driving sales. If you're in marketing, you have a marketer's outlook where you're looking at that long-term game toward the sale. But as a consumer, we all know how long it can take us to make a purchase decision, right? So I think it's just, you've always got to return to that consumer perspective. Just put yourself in your own shoes to realize, when I'm buying a car, it's going to take me some time to decide. One example that comes to mind for me is I bought myself a Nintendo Switch. I'm a grown man in my 30s, but I bought a Nintendo Switch, and that's something I built up to for quite a long time. It wasn't an impulse decision. So we just have to put ourselves, like I said, in our own shoes to understand how marketing and sales really, really work together.
And then I was just going to say, you talked cross-functional there. You talked around different divisions there. You've talked a lot about internal there. Was some of the things that you would encounter on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis with it, or you do as marketers, is it internal education? Is it educating others around the business? Because again, going back to your original point, hey, brand advertising, just sexy ads. Was there a lot of has there been, or do you think there's a lot of internal education that's being had to back up obviously a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned today?
Yeah, I think that's a key piece of it, Stu, that internal education is a big part of the job, because the thing about marketing is that everyone in society is marketed to on a daily basis. So it's a function that everyone thinks they know something about, like, or that they think they're experts on, right? That I'm not an engineer, so I would never claim to know what goes into the discipline of engineering. But marketing, by virtue of the fact that we all interact with marketing and advertising on a daily basis, we tend to think we've got it figured out, when there's a lot at work, there's a lot at play, a lot of complexity to do it effectively. Anyone can market, anyone can advertise, but to do it with the optimal effectiveness and to produce the best results is very difficult. So that does bring you back to the need to educate stakeholders internally and show the difference between just advertising and doing it well. And that tends to tends to be the type of marketing that wins awards and more importantly drives business results.
Mhm.
So on that point then, how important now, because you talked around upfront goals, ROI, setting up for success, how important now is becoming data and insight in a brand marketer's role today? And I'd be really keen to see and understand from your experience, how's that potentially evolved since you started in the industry, and how important is it today, and how much have you seen that evolve in the role?
Great question. I mean, certainly, it'll come as no surprise, and I'm sure the three of us, as well as anyone tuning in, will agree that data and insights have become increasingly more critical to the discipline of marketing. But that hasn't happened in isolation. And what I mean by that is data and insights are only as good as what you do with them, right? That it's an applied science. It's not, the data doesn't tell you what to do with it. Sometimes it can feel that way when the conclusion is so obvious. But it actually creates it allows marketers to do what they do best even better, and simply enables them to have greater substantiation, a greater set of facts and information to base decisions on, rather than just intuition. Once upon a time, I think marketing was more art than science, and you had to rely on your innate understanding of your target audience, where now you can validate that. You can validate it after the fact, after you've fielded a campaign. You can also do it before, right? You can pre-test creative. You can try different messaging. You can understand what's important to your consumers. So I think, you see this in sports, and I often look to sports. I'm a huge sports fan, as you both know. And I've worked in sports for part of my career. There's always this debate between old school scouting and analytics. And I think the same dynamic plays out in marketing, that, they're positioned as opposed to one another, when really you have to do both. You have to have that intuition. You have to have a sense of what messaging will resonate, and how to position your brand. That art is still very much alive in marketing, but you have to marry that with an understanding of the science, and how to test your thinking, and then how to measure your effectiveness.
I talk a lot around actionable insights. And I think sometimes people think actionable insights would be taking something and then maybe taking a segment and activating in this digital world against the segments, for instance. Well, actually, actionable insights could be anything. It could be we've gone and surveyed 3 people around a certain something and taken that, and then it maybe helped us inform an opinion. Or it might be utilizing a bit of data from a campaign that may be performed, and take that and apply that to targeting. Or it could be something which is, a broader piece, which is ran campaign over here, then went and did a brand lift study, for instance, taking those findings and applying them moving forward around a change of creative, or a complete change of an idea, or whatever it might be. So I think actionable insight and data it's that bit, as you're saying, it's what you then do with it that's the important thing. And it doesn't always have to be in some kind of, really intricate kind of way of targeting digital. It can be just taking something and then using it, but then applying it towards something moving forward.
Right. No, I think that's really well said, Stu. And another example. So I've drawn on sports. We've talked about that and how these same dynamics play out in sports. Another great example I always refer to is Netflix in its early days. So famously, Netflix created House of Cards because its internal data showed that its audience disproportionately gravitated to political thrillers, movies and TV shows starring Kevin Spacey, set in DC, and they sort of stitched a content series together around that. They put those data points together.
I
Undoubtedly,
never knew that. I never heard that story. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. There's actually an article that came out about the streaming wars between HBO and Netflix, I think just last week, which is really worth checking out.
Because I mean, they obviously curate your content, right, based on that, but to actually produce something is something I haven't heard. Very interesting.
Undoubtedly a successful series too.
It was the launch of the brand. It was the launch of the brand.
That's right. It was their first big. I don't know if it was their first original series. I think they had one or two before that. But it was certainly the big hit. Yeah, it was their first big hit. But I mean, is that necessarily superior in every case to content that's created by other means? Like HBO, I don't know if they use the same methodology for a lot of their series, but they've been just as successful, if not more. So again, I say this only to point out that the role of intuition and understanding your audience and making great content, that's still as essential as ever.
Absolutely.
I 100% agree. I was just gonna say, like, on the data and then the experience, right? So data is just so accessible now, right? So I think it's like table stakes. You have no excuse to not use data to create insight, though. But then what we've seen, I think we've all seen, is depending on the person or the experience that you give data to, they can create insight, or they could just create more, tell you what the data says, or they can create insight and then based on experience, intuition, whatever, gut feel. I've seen some people just take, to Stu's point, like a little survey kind of result and create, something very meaningful with that. When other people are like, oh, I need, I don't have enough data, I need more and more. And they just, so there really is that art and science. And you can really see it. You can tell, it's good when you see it. And a lot of times that's the experience. So,
definitely.
Right. This is really interesting. And, so things are obviously always moving and, evolving. So from like a brand marketing standpoint, are there, what are the trends or, where are things moving in the next 12 months, kind of future gaze? What are some of the, maybe 3 things that you see kind of changing the landscape?
Yeah, great question. I think we've touched briefly on the fact that most economic observers, analysts are predicting that we're heading into a recession. So I think the macroeconomic environment is certainly going to change, or at least impact how marketers make their plans and go to market. And I think we've talked about how the most effective, most successful ones will market through the recession and continue to invest in their brand so that it pays off for them throughout the recession and as we come out of it.
No, so Coca-Cola just came out with a pretty much a statement, I guess, just saying that, we're going to continue to invest.
Wow.
There's things, just the other day I was reading something. Yeah. But I mean, I think they're the the business case for doing that anyway, because they're always investing. But yeah, I mean, I think you'll see a lot of brands that do that, but a lot of ones that you don't hear about that maybe disappear.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's I don't think it's coincidental that it's always the brands like Coca-Cola and Nike and the usual suspects who are known around the world for being some of the best brand marketers on the planet that tend to succeed when things get challenging, and that's because of that continued investment in their brand. So I think we've correctly identified that the macroeconomic environment and recession is going to be challenging for marketers. I think the second, and I know Linchpin has I think you've published some content around this, and I think it's going to be an increasingly significant topic of conversation is what's happening in digital and social media. I think that the outlook is perhaps more uncertain than it's been for quite some time, maybe ever, for
Mm-hmm.
the biggest social media players. Elon Musk having purchased Twitter, and there's been a flurry of change since he took the reins. I think, what does that mean for advertisers? I saw his dear advertisers note, I think, on his first day, which was
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And it just seems like he's trying to be all things to all people. He's trying to placate advertisers at the same time. He's, making some controversial decisions in terms of how they're resourced and how the product operates. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch for marketers over the next 6 to 12 months. Meta investing heavily in the metaverse. Is that vision going to be realized? Hard to say right now, because they're making some pretty big bets in that space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that has significant implications for marketers. And then if I had to pick a third,
And I think on that, recently there was a piece around TikTok marketeers now creating specific video content just for TikTok. So you see how a brand 3 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, obviously had low a low penetration or low understanding of that in the space. Not many people knew it. Now look how that's evolved in the last year to 18 months, especially with COVID. That brand now is taking on. So yeah, 3 brands within that space that are all kind of going on their own interesting trajectory, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's something to watch for sure, to say the least. And I think if I had to pick maybe a third item of interest for marketers over the next 6 to 12 months, it's the continuing fragmentation of media, right? That as attention is diffused and distributed across more and more platforms and publishers, how do marketers work in that environment? It used to be quite simple that you had, to use Musk's own terminology since acquiring Twitter, like there was a pretty there was a common town square, let's say, where you knew that if you invested in broadcast media and the biggest digital platforms, you would find your audience. But as that audience splinters and has more choice on where to spend their time and attention, what do marketers do? How do they navigate that environment? I think that's going to be challenging and not an easy question to solve for.
No, and you look at things like the CTV space, which in terms of market budget allocation in the last 12 months, I think it's, as we know, significant growth. But challenges are still the ability to track, ability to understand performance, the ability to understand audience in that space. It's obviously a huge space. It's going to, erupt, as I said, and evolve in the coming, over the next coming few years. But big thing around attribution and tracking in that space for marketeers to understand, right?
Definitely. Well said.
So the final question, and from us is a quick fire. We like to call it what 3 things. So for you, Scott, what 3 things should someone consider when they're putting together a brand campaign? Appreciate it's a bit generic, but what kind of 3 top 5 things would you recommend?
That's a fun question. I love a lightning round. Okay. If I had to suggest 3 things that any marketer should consider when developing a campaign, I think you have to start with audience. Who are we speaking to? And that sets you up for success or failure. That you really do have to understand who your addressable market is, why they are inclined to be interested in your brand and to do business with you. So I think you start with a deep understanding of your audience, and that's where data and insights come in. And then with that understanding, I think you then have to formulate a story. I think you have to come up. So the second point is a story, and that encompasses everything from your messaging to why it's relevant to that audience, so that you know when you get your message to those people, why it's going to matter to them. So I think you start with audience, then you come up with your story, and then we've talked about it already, but measurement, right? Like without measurement, I don't know how you can call any campaign a success or a failure unless you have the goalposts in place to tell you how well you did, right? Like, and that it's probably where you start. Maybe I should have led with that, because measurement does come after a campaign, but you need to plan for it right up front. What are you looking to achieve? Is it brand opinion you're trying to shift? Is it purchase consideration and intent? Is it, I mean, in some cases, especially for e-commerce retailers where they're more direct response, maybe it is a transaction now. Maybe it is sales now. Brand marketers are often looking at the long term and the short term, but short term results do matter, especially again for e-commerce. So I think once you have those 3 ingredients in place, you're more often than not, you're probably set up for success. And even if you don't succeed, you'll at least have the learnings for next time.
Audience, story, measurement. For any person putting together a plan, you've just given them the perfect media
blueprint
campaign.
Oh yeah.
Awesome, Scott.
So Scott, this was really insightful. Really appreciate you joining us today and giving your time. Is there like a preferred, I don't know, we know you're on LinkedIn. If anyone wanted to reach out, kind of reach you on LinkedIn, is, anywhere else they can
Yeah,
find you?
I mean, definitely LinkedIn. I try to be fairly active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is always a great place to start. I do have to circle back to where we started. As much as I enjoyed the promotion Dan gave me, I'm senior manager of content marketing and partnership. As much as I'd love to be director, I've got to correct the record on that one. So, that's my boss.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, I think you operate probably at a director level. So.
That's kind of you to say. Thank you. This was really fun. I really enjoyed the conversation, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. So we'll obviously have this cut downs on LinkedIn. We'll have the full videos probably on YouTube. But yeah, so any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to any of us. Definitely to Scott. Carry the conversation, keep it going if that makes sense. And then yeah, take care.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.